The Steelers and Panthers need to focus on building up their offenses while James Cook is looking to get paid by the Bills. We continue to dig into the biggest offseason storylines around the NFL in today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. For those of you who are new to the pod, I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst for NFL Network.
Yes, welcome. I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting the entire offseason here for sportingnews.com.
This week, we are going through the top 12 biggest storylines of the offseason that we're following in terms of just offenses mostly, right? Because this is a fantasy football podcast, and how these storylines could impact fantasy football for the 2025 season. We hit on the top 3 on yesterday's show. We're going to go through 3 more today, including like who will be the Steelers' next quarterback? Will they add a wide receiver 2 next to George Pickens? They have a lot of things they have to figure out on offense. Will the Bills pay Josh Allen? Plus, they have to get or will they pay James Cook? Sorry, and then they have to also get Josh Allen more receivers. And then how will the Panthers revamp their offense to really Bryce Young is on the cusp of breaking out, but how can they continue to help him grow this offseason by giving him the weapons he needs? So we're going to dig into those storylines. But before we do that, I do want to say this morning we got breaking news that Travis Kelce will return for another season in the NFL. He's not retiring. We've hit on Travis Kelce a lot already this offseason. We had him, ranked tight end 8 or 9 in our consensus rankings. He's going to stay there. I just want us to remember, at this point, he's more of a huge name than he is going to be a great fantasy asset for next year.
Yeah, they just need to go get some help for him. And again, it's reshuffling these receivers. I think they're going to be hopeful that Rashee Rice comes back healthy and doesn't have to deal with too much discipline so he can stay on the field with Xavier Worthy. Those are going to be the guys going forward, right? Those are going to be Mahomes' young receivers. And hopefully they'll grow into be his version of A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. They'll be the 1-2 punch, and you'll see the pivot to using more receiving help. This does not preclude the Chiefs from looking at a tight end in the draft so they can move on and kind of have the successor for Travis Kelce. If he's coming back, it makes it less likely he's going to come back for next year. So, again, the diminishing returns can be there. Remember, Kelce was the guy alone for a while without Tyreek Hill. I think that's slowly changing as we get to Worthy and Rice. They both had a year essentially under their belt here with Mahomes. So just watch for that. I think there's going to be a pivot on this team. And again, I would expect them to look at somebody who can replace Kelce. If it's not this year's draft, I would try to do this year's draft because the talent at this position is very strong. Then at least for next year, I do not see Noah Gray being that player for the Chiefs.
I agree with you there. All right, let's get into our offseason storylines that we're following. The first one being for this episode is who will the Steelers' next quarterback be, and will they add a big name wide receiver too? Because if they don't, it doesn't really matter who the next quarterback is, right? Because if it's only George Pickens again they're throwing to, they're probably going to struggle. But the Steelers scored the 10th fewest fantasy points as a team in 2024. That was their first year under Arthur Smith with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson starting during that year. It wasn't all that better than in 2023 when they averaged the 6th fewest fantasy points, and that was under Matt Canada, who we all hated for fantasy, right? And with Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett as the starting quarterback. So we thought those were huge improvements. It really didn't end up being in the fantasy scoreboard when it comes to helping us win our leagues, right? There's not many quarterbacks available. So I'm going to give you a list here, Vinny, and I want you to rank them for me for what you would like to see the Steelers do in terms of what's good for them and what's good for fantasy in 2025. So you obviously got the option of signing either Justin Fields or Russell Wilson back, go into trade for Matthew Stafford, signing Sam Darnold in free agency, maybe trading or waiting for Kirk Cousins to get cut, or moving up in the draft to grab a Shedeur Sanders, or I think it'd be much harder to move up for Cam Ward. Maybe that's an option, but rank those options for me.
Yeah, everything is on the table here for the Steelers, including some other quarterbacks that have been mentioned, Quinn Ewers in a later round, or Jackson Dart, someone that they could draft outside of the first round potentially. So that's where I personally would go. I'm not sure if the Steelers are comfortable going in that direction. I think they can reevaluate Justin Fields, right? I don't think it's going to be the best move for fantasy necessarily, the rest of the weapons, but Fields can probably get it done with his legs and do a little bit more here in the Arthur Smith offense. That's a complication, right? Because we're not sure just a traditional pocket passer can do well in the Arthur Smith system. I don't know if we know any quarterback can do well in the system overall, but going back, his best production was probably came from Ryan Tannehill when they were in Tennessee, and that's again another mobile guy, but still he did a lot of pocket passing, playing off the running game and throwing downfield. And essentially, I think that's what the Steelers want to do. They want to have a stronger running game. They didn't have that running game last year. So speaking of things that they need to fill, they'll probably look at Omari and Hampton or a Caleb Johnson, probably not Ashton Genty, unless he falls a little bit in the first round. I think they need to get a feature back there as well. So I think rookie feature back, that's the easy route, right? We move on from Najee Harris in free agency and we go there. The quarterback is a little more complicated when you think about, do we go for rookie? Because it sets you back a little bit. You have that 10-7 baseline, right? So you know you have a team, if you get the right quarterback, you hit on the right quarterback, you can push your ceiling in the playoffs a little bit higher. So I think coming around all that, I think Matthew Stafford makes sense if they can get him. I think that's a tough person to get. And then you add another receiver, you know he can get the ball downfield to George Pickens. That's the problem with Fields, I think, in general, is that he's not going to have the big arm. So I would say he's my first choice here. And basically, this is how I'm looking at it for the Rams, too. Like, I would stick with Stafford if your options are Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold. So I would go Stafford, Cousins, Darnold. And then I would think about just Justin Fields rolling with him solo. I think you need to bring in somebody else with him. So that's how I'm ranking them right now based on their chance to win, because we know you can win if you have a good defense and Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, in terms of like who I would be most excited about for fantasy as themselves, it's obviously Justin Fields, right? I think he's probably the only one of this group that would come in and actually be a good fantasy producer or an all right one. I will say, though, as a team, the Steelers average about 10 fewer points per game with Justin Fields as a starter than Russell Wilson for fantasy points per game. So there was more fantasy impact and production with Russell Wilson out there. I did, as a Steelers fan, I'll just throw that out there. I am a Steelers fan. I'm a biased Steelers fan. I cannot watch Russell Wilson back there again. Please don't.
No. I think he's out.
Yeah. My number one hope would be Stafford. I think it's unfortunate that's the best option out there, but Stafford's still a good quarterback. And I think he would be good for George Pickens. And if they could add more weapons for him, then he maybe could do well with this team. But again, does he fit in with Arthur Smith? I don't know. I do think maybe the best option for them is just to stick with Justin Fields. Like you said, draft Quinn Ewers, and hopefully they can get him in the second and don't have to spend a first on him. But it seems like he's going to be going after the first round. And I actually like that setup a little bit. And you know what? If Fields struggles, and maybe finally you can lose enough games to get a true quarterback the next season. But again, like I said, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is unless they get more weapons for that quarterback, because George Pickens, we can see the talent in specific games, and other games it kind of disappears, but he needs help. Like he needs guys to take the coverage off of him, and he can't do everything. So what my dream would be for them to use the first round pick on a wide receiver like Emeka Egbuka. That would be my dream. And then also to add Chris Godwin in the slot in free agency. So if you went Pickens, Egbuka, and Chris Godwin, all of a sudden with Pat Freiermuth, it doesn't even really matter if it's just Jalen Warren back there as running back. That would be a great, group of weapons here for whatever quarterback is with the Steelers.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say, I'll knock on Stafford, Cousins, and Darnold. I mean, Stafford has pretty much played in Detroit in a dome, inside or in Los Angeles. You've had Kirk Cousins play in Minnesota and Atlanta in domes. Sam Darnold had his best season in a dome. So I'm a little concerned when you bring these guys outside those games in November and December where their arms suddenly have to cut through wind and playing some pretty tough defenses. I know the Bengals might be in transition. They're not that great right now. You have the Browns might be losing Myles Garrett, but you still have the Ravens. It's always a challenge at that time of year. So that's my concern. Can these guys get it done as pocket passers facing pressure when the weather is a little harder and you're not getting pristine conditions to throw the ball? So Justin Fields, again, they might do some more ugly winning with Justin Fields, but I think he might be built to give them the success they need now. And then you're right, they explore that rookie and see if it works out. If not, you just dive right back in to the draft in 2026 and see what you have there. So again, the Steelers, like you said, might have to take a few steps back with their quarterback and their passing game to get the quarterback they want.
Yeah, they just keep holding on hope, and those 9-10 win seasons is all they care about. Just get killed in the wild card round and they're happy. We are going to move on because the Steelers make my blood pressure too high. We need to talk about the Bills. They make me happier, and you know what? Their front office has to make a tough decision right now. James Cook wants to get paid. He still has another year on his rookie contract, but he's really pushing it. So let's move on to that. And also, will they add receivers for Josh Allen? Lots of things that the Bills have to work on this offseason. We'll get to it right after a quick break. All right, so moving on to our next big offseason storyline that we are watching this year when it comes to fantasy football. And this is a big one because we know these running backs have a hard time getting the contract they deserve and want to be right? But James Cook has come out and is saying he's asking for $15 million a year. Now, he still does have another year on his rookie contract, so the Bills don't have to pay him just yet. But could he hold out? I don't know. But do you think the Bills will pay that? Do you think they should pay it? Do you think James Cook is worth it?
I don't know if James Cook is worth it. I mean, this would surpass what Saquon Barkley is getting from the Eagles, and he had the best season that we've ever seen in terms of production all the way through winning a Super Bowl and winning the rushing and scrimmage titles. And he was making close to $13 million, 12.6, I think was the number per season. So you think right now that might be the absolute ceiling for running backs. I mean, $15 million is a stretch. I can see where this comes from. I think we had a similar situation with his brother Dalvin in Minnesota at one point, and they didn't want to maybe give in as much with the contract. Look, James Cook is a good back, but let's keep this in mind. I mean, we talked about the MVP race, and that was a debate between Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, we said Derrick Henry hurt Lamar Jackson's chances. Well, I don't think anyone saw James Cook as the one hurting or cutting into Josh Allen's chances. We saw James Cook as the finisher, right? That's why he had all those touchdowns, because you had Josh Allen. It was the design of their offense with Joe Brady to run a little bit more. I'm not quite sure he's that level of Saquon Barkley where he can take over some games. Like, he has to complement what they're doing with Allen, and everyone's afraid of Allen and his big arm. So that's going to have people guarding things downfield. Everyone's afraid of Allen taking off and running and causing problems. So I would say it's kind of goes hand in hand, right? I think Saquon Barkley kind of facilitated the downfield passing game for Jalen Hurts. Well, I think Josh Allen does more of the facilitating for James Cook. So I wouldn't go nuts paying him. I mean, that's not a position where you want to invest that much money. I'm just going to say it. $15 million is too much. Again, Saquon Barkley topped out, and he was happy with that deal. He was thrilled to get that deal from the Eagles at the top of the market. So this says he's asking for $2 million more than that. That's kind of unreasonable at this point. So hopefully he doesn't have an issue like sitting out or just trying to not play until he gets his way. Look, the Bills will easily move on if that's the case, and they'll find someone else who can do this playing off Josh Allen.
I will say, I don't think it's completely fair to compare, him to what Saquon Barkley was paid. I do think, if Barkley went on the market now, he'd get paid way more, right? He was coming off, a lot of injuries with the Giants, a lot of disappointing performances because he was on a bad team. People could see the flashes and see how talented he could be. But I do think if Saquon Barkley went to a team that was, mediocre or a mediocre line or below average line, I don't know if it would have been all that different than the Giants. He's a great talent that can take it to the house on any given play, but it definitely is helpful when you're playing against the best or behind the best line. That helps him get into open space. And without getting into open space, then his skill set is kind of minimized, right? So I think it's okay to say, for a running back to get paid more than Barkley did. Jonathan Taylor's at $14 million a year. Christian McCaffrey's at $19 million a year. Those are the top two. This is how it works for most, all other positions. I guess it's besides running back. It's when you're due for a contract, you're going to get top of the market, even when you're not better than the people ahead of you. I mean, look at the quarterback market right now. Dak Prescott, Jordan Love. Jordan Love's making $15 more million a year than Josh Allen. It's just insane. So I'm okay with the $15 million a year. I think, though, if they're going to give him that, they better trust him to get more work than just 207 carries. That's all they gave him this year in 16 games. That's not enough. Like, he's been hyper efficient with his workload in his career, averaging 5 yards per carry. But they don't give him enough work to say you should get $15 million a year.
Yeah, the complimentary work is there. We get it. And he scored all those touchdowns. But you're right. They don't lean on him to be the centerpiece. The Eagles kind of drove Saquon Barkley into the ground with his carries. And this is an explosive, balanced offense where they can throw the ball downfield as well. So, again, I'm not saying necessarily that the market and the value of it shouldn't push up his deal. I just don't think he's worth 15 million per season, in particular to the Bills, right? I think he's more a complementary piece where Saquon Barkley is a centerpiece with AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. They're the centerpieces here to play off Jalen Hurts. I don't think he's kind of the one guy that you say is indispensable after Josh Allen. I think it's Josh Allen, and then everyone else is kind of just playing off that, right? And they're still trying to figure out receiver and all that. So I'm not sure James Cook is worth it. We'll see. Maybe if the Bills can give it to him in the short term, they might do it and say, hey, we'll do this and give you the $30 million guaranteed over like 2 years. But we're not going to necessarily say we're going to commit to you beyond that because, again, the mileage will start to add up and he will get away from his prime here pretty soon.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And we have to realize this could have been just an outlier season of rushing touchdowns with 16 because he had 4 career rushing touchdowns entering this season. I will say, we're talking about $15 million a year. That's what they just extended Khalil Shakir to, 4-year extension. $60 million, I think. Yeah. $15 million per year. And personally, James Cook is much more important to this offense, I think, than Khalil Shakir. I know Shakir led the team in receptions and targets and receiving yards with 821, had 4 receiving touchdowns. But I mean, he averaged 10 yards per reception. I think he's fine. He's a fine talent. And I think $15 million a year is fine, right? Wide receivers are just paid more. But they cannot go into the season with Shakir as their top target again. Like, that's just not, it's not going to get them to a Super Bowl win.
Yeah, then you look at the options. Amari Cooper's a free agent. I don't think they'll go out and get like someone comparable in terms of the veteran status, such as Keenan Allen or DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, T. Higgins, of course, we talked about would be the ideal, but there's a trend that is happening that the Bengals look like they're going to bring him back. So if you take T. Higgins off the market, then you're looking at Darius Slayton. There's a little bit of correlation because Brian Dable was with Slayton, and now he could go to Dable's old team. So, but that's not exciting, right? I would think you look at the draft again here. They made a big mistake last year in letting Xavier Worthy get by them and go to the Chiefs. I think they would much rather have him than Keon Coleman right now. So jury's still out on Coleman. He was hurt. So maybe they have some hopes for him to play off Shakir. I think they just locked down Shakir's because they didn't want to lose the one asset that they trusted most, or Josh Allen could lobby for as being a key component. So he does definitely want Shakir, but it's interesting. Like, it hasn't panned out too much with Dalton Kincaid. Coleman has still got to do a lot to prove things to us. And again, we'll see where they go. Again, I would keep drafting receivers. It's a good, talented pool here that you're going to look at in later rounds, so the Bills don't have to focus on that early. They can focus on defense. So that's where I would go. Try to get a little bit more young help on this offense. Again, receiver more valuable right now to the Bills, just upgrading that than looking at paying James Cook at this particular moment.
Yeah, and if they think Chris Godwin is healthy enough, then maybe that's their go-to option. I do think they need to add some height, though. So you did bring up Darius Slayton. I think that would be a nice add. And then just pick a bunch of guys later in the draft and just try to, hit on one of them. I think I like that. I don't think they're going to go early wide receiver again in the first or second round. Maybe I'm wrong, but the Keon Coleman one, maybe he's better if they can play him in his correct role and not depend on him so much on the outside. It wasn't the most beautiful rookie season, though. That's for sure. We are going to get onto another offense that has to figure out receivers to add to their team because they went wide receiver in the first round last year too. And he was also a big disappointment in Xavier Legette. So we're going to talk about how the Panthers can revamp their offense to help Bryce Young continue to grow and build upon his late success in the second year he had last year. We'll get to that right after a quick break. All right, continuing our top storylines we were following during the 2025 offseason for fantasy football, the Panthers. And the Panthers offense, I actually am pretty excited about for next year. So this is a truly like a team I am paying close attention to this offseason because I think they can be a big surprise come next year. I think they could really break out in their second year under Dave Canales. We saw the breakout late last season with Bryce Young really starting to grow. Obviously, they need to get more weapons, and they did focus on that last year, right? For Bryce Young, and it took some time because there are a lot of young guys and Xavier Legette who didn't do a ton in his rookie season, but maybe he could break out in year 2. He was a first-round pick. And then you had Jalen Coker. He had some big games there throughout the year as an undrafted free agent in 2024. And then Jatavian Sanders, they drafted at tight end in the 4th round. They had Adam Thielen still there, but again, none of them put up big numbers. Adam Thielen led the team with 615 yards. He did only play 10 games. Legette at 497 and Coker at 478 for the top 3. I think they still need to add more talent, like definitely, especially since Adam Thielen, we don't even know if he'll still be here next year.
Yeah, Adam Thielen has done what they need, right? I mean, he's kind of a veteran presence who's been there for Bryce Young in this transition the last couple of years, kind of just adapts to an offense pretty quickly. So we'll see what they do with him because he's often used as their slot guy, and he's a big slot. So do they go after Chris Godwin, who worked with Dave Canales there in Tampa? I mean, I think Jaguars might be interested if Christian Kirk's injury is a little bit more because of Liam Cohen, but Godwin, I think, is going to explore staying in Tampa, but Carolina is going to be an appeal outside because he already knows the offense. You can plug and play in it, and especially if the slot opening is real here. But what they need, much like the Steelers, is a technically sound guy that is just going to get open all the time. And I'm glad he brought up Ibuka, sorry, and with Godwin, because those two are very similar to me. They're like route runners who get open. I don't think they need a guy to stretch the field. I think Legette has that ability. He's maybe the speedy guy that you look at to do that. And maybe you look at more of a number 1 type, right? That can line up all over the place. I even thought that Stephon Diggs might be good in this if he recovers from the knee injury to kind of stabilize things here as a receiver that can be a clear go-to guy all over the field for Bryce Young. So I think what would be ideal, and we talked about Ibuka and Godwin being combination for the Steelers, it also would work pretty well for the Panthers if they could get that. The problem is their defense is so bad, they might have to focus on defense early. I mean, it was historically bad, so they might have to focus on that a little bit more in the draft, maybe go for some offensive pieces and kind of piecemeal it a little bit in free agency. The good news is I think they've got Chuba Hubbard under contract, so that's a good thing. You have Jatavion Sanders. I think they have a tight end they can build around a little bit here. I think Legette still has some talent that they can look at here. So they have a few pieces. They just need to add a few more experienced guys.
I will say if Tet McMillan is sitting there at number 8 overall and they're on the clock, I do think they just need to take him because I do think he has a skill set to be a true alpha wide receiver 1 in this league. I think he could really grow with Bryce Young, and that would give him a true guy that he can
like
target.
Mike Evans, it'll be just like Mike Evans in this offense, I think,
Yeah.
So we know what he's done for Dave Canales. So if you get an alpha like that, I think they just need a clear cut. We don't want to guess who's the guy. Is it in the middle? Is it Legette? Who's the guy that Bryce Young tests most? It just has to be clear cut. Here's your go-to guy, whether it's Higgins or anybody else that we've been talking about.
And it's actually interesting too, because I'm wondering if they need to add a running back with pass catching abilities, right? Because Jonathan Brooks, we don't know when he'll be back. He tore his ACL again late in the season after barely coming back. Who even knows if he plays next year? So they're going to lean on Chuba Hubbard again, which Hubbard on the ground was great, right? And he should definitely be their starting running back. However, when it comes to receiving, I mean, he averaged about 4 yards per reception. That is so incredibly bad. It was exactly 4.0 yards per reception. He did get a decent amount of targets at 54. He got 43 receptions, 171 receiving yards. Again, 4 yards per reception. Miles Sanders was at 6.2 yards per reception on 24 receptions. And that's also bad. 6.2 is also bad. So think about how bad that is for Hubbard at 4.0 for a running back. I think they need to add a check down option for Bryce Young because like I brought up JT Sanders and I do like him, but we'll see what he can become in his second year. He doesn't really have the safety net, right, that he needs in either a tight end or a running back. That might be a place they have to look this year.
Yeah, you can't just expect Adam Thielen as he gets older just to kind of work where he should be producing at this point, right? I mean, he's just been that guy all the way through since his career started with the Vikings, that he's just overachieving. You can't keep counting on him to do that as the age has kind of crept into what he can do. He's still a very valuable Panther, and I would say if Bryce Young said who do I rely upon most, it would be him. But you're right. If he's out the door or he retires, then all of a sudden you're scrambling and you need to get that guy. So we'll see if they can get McMillan. I don't know if there's a lot of first-round receivers now because Luther Burden's value is kind of falling. We're not sure about the Texas guys, how they've fallen to place with Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond. So there are some questions at receiver beyond those guys. I think it basically you look at Agbuka being the next guy after McMillan that you totally trust. And if the Panthers can end up with one of those guys, I think you'll have your answer for a clear-cut number one here for Bryce Young.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe, just maybe they'll ignore defense in the draft. Like give it to us, fantasy analysts, please. Just ignore defense.
Just pick all offensive picks. Yeah. Every pick in the draft should be offense.
Load up on offense.
For every team.
Yeah. Keep your defense terrible. And let's go. Let's do this for fantasy. But no, I am excited to see what this offense can turn into. Obviously, if they don't do it this year, then I might just have to give up hope. But I do think Bryce Young with Dave Canales can turn this offense into something. And we all want more good offenses across the NFL. So excited to follow them this offseason. That is it for today's episode. Tomorrow, we'll get into 3 more big storylines that we're following in the offseason. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. But for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season's over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.